This is Spirit Gym. Paul's guest today is David Lorimer, a visionary polymath, author, and poet. David is the founder of Character Education Scotland, program director of the Scientific and Medical Network, and former president of the Wreckin Trust and the Swedenborg Society. He has been editor of the publication Paradigm Explorer since 1986. And was the instigator of the Beyond the Brain conference series in 1995, as well as coordinating the Mystics and Scientists conferences every year since the late 1980s. In addition to his many other achievements, in 2020, David was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award as a visionary leader by the Visionaries International Network. Thank you for listening to this podcast, which would not be possible without you, our subscribers, and also our premier sponsors, Organifi, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, and Wild Pastures. The sponsors' special offers and discounts are mentioned throughout this episode, or you can visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast. The title of Paul's conversation with David today is As Above, So Below.
Hello, everybody. Well, as you can see, our title today is As Above, So Below with David Lorimer. I'm very excited to have David on the podcast today. David has delivered a huge amount of amazing information through the Scientific Medical Network. I've listened to countless of the presentations there with many excellent minds, and David is one of the most well-read, broadest and deepest people I've ever had the chance to listen to. So I thought, I got to get David on the podcast. So David, welcome.
Well, that's very flattering. Thank you very much indeed, Paul, and nice to be here.
Well, I got to give credit where credit's due. You're as bad as me. All the books you cite all the time, I'm like writing down. I'm like, okay, I got to get that one. I got to get that one. Like, people always complain I cost people so much money because of all the book references I give out, but I think you're right there with me.
Well, sometimes some people know who are regular readers of Paradigm Explorer, they say that I save them from having to read the book because they get a good enough account of the book from the review.
Exactly.
So that's Rupert Sheldrake even said that to me once.
That's nice of him. Well, David, what I like to do at the beginning of the podcast, just so the guests, listeners get to know the guests and have a sense of who they are, is have everyone give a little biographical sketch of who you are, an overview of your education, and sort of what shaped you to be the person you are. And could you share the mission, vision, and values of the Scientific Medical Network?
Yes, well, the network, it's an educational charity, and so our mission is really to help midwife a new worldview, an ecological, spiritual worldview, which goes beyond the limitations of the exploitative and materialistic worldview based on the idea of mechanisms. And so we bring people together with this in mind in a transformative process, and this really drives all our content. You know, the Mystics and Scientists conference, the Beyond the Brain conference, the webinar program, the groups that we have, and so that's the underlying thrust, if you like, of the network. The values, I mentioned a couple of them already, which is this balance between open-mindedness and rigor.
Right.
And it reminds me of what a friend used to call a boggle threshold. And so your boggle threshold is where you say to yourself, I just can't accept that.
Right.
And it just doesn't make any sense. And so we're trying to make sense of the world, but within a wider and deeper context that doesn't ignore the inner dimension of the human life and, of course, the nature of consciousness. And then so there's open-mindedness, rigor, and then care for others is very important, and by implication, friendship. And so a lot of close friendships are made in the network because you're really with like-minded people.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm very impressed with the diversity of guests that you have, ranging from psychologists to various types of researchers to Jungian types. to medical people. I mean, quite a diversity. And I don't think I've ever listened to any of the presentations where I didn't get something out of it and think, wow, this is really worth it. There's always something in there. There's gems in them, all of them.
Yes, well, I mean, an example was what we had last night, Robin Saltonstall, talking about eco-psychology and how you bring these two disciplines or two areas together. So they're very interdisciplinary. And I suppose another way of putting our work would be that we're exploring the interface between science and spirituality, science and consciousness, but also science and mysticism and science and esotericism, but
Right.
not science and Christian theology. Although we have Christians, obviously, in the network, our focus is not Christian theology as such, but rather more the mystical side, hence the idea of the Mystics and Scientists Conference.
Yeah, well, I think I'll just say that I'm grateful for that.
Yes, well, it's SBNR, isn't it? Spiritual but not religious. And I think
Yes.
a lot of our members fall into that category.
Yeah, that's fantastic. My next area of exploration has to do with science. And now that I understand you have a background in the philosophy of science, I think this is going to be a very interesting topic to talk about. So, the past 4 years since the start of the COVID pandemic have potentially been the most damaging series of events with regard to science, what science is intended for, and how science is used. We now have an environment where everything from dangerous drugs and vaccines to junk food and gadgets are being sold with so-called scientific validation. Yet so often we find this very science isn't science, but is deceptive marketing. I was shocked and still am at the scientific community because they did not take a stand during the COVID pandemic. And to this very day, regarding what isn't science and what isn't the legitimate use of science, all these issues fall completely within scientism and may be warnings that great scientists and thinkers, they reflect the warnings that great scientists and thinkers have shared in the past about the onset of scientism and how dangerous it could be. So I'm curious to your thoughts on everything I've just shared, and really about the thing that concerned me is it was clear to me that the so-called science being used to usher in the pandemic was not science and still is not science. And the only science is the people now coming out against it and doing the hard work to even get things published and having retractions. But I was shocked that there wasn't more real scientists sounding the alarm and saying, look, this is not science and here's why. And so because our Western culture deifies science, like God, whenever anyone on television says, oh, it's scientifically validated, you get crazy people like Anthony Fauci and Bill Gates claiming, oh, this is what the science says. They just believe it. And so I was really saddened that there weren't more scientists stepping forward to kind of counterbalance that narrative to protect people.
Well, that's a big rabbit hole.
Well, let's dive.
I just at the outset, I should say the views I'm expressing here are my personal views. They're can't be taken as the views of the Scientific and Medical Network because there is a diversity of opinion on this. But so far as I'm concerned, I followed the whole evolution very closely, and what it shows is the politicization of science,
Yes.
but also the agency capture, and particularly the various agencies in the US, and all of the health agencies basically being captured by the pharmaceutical industry. And this goes back over 100 years to the Flexner report,
Yep.
where the medical schools were kind of standardized to take broadly the approach they still take, then a more pharmaceutical approach over and against natural medicine, natural approach, and so on. And in the especially since the passing of the 1986 Vaccine Act in the States, this gave the pharmaceutical industry immunity from having to pay out large sums of money for vaccine injuries. And the whole vaccine area has become an absolute minefield.
Yeah.
And one of the people who's written about this most eloquently, it's a book I've just reviewed for the next issue. It's called Follow the Science, where the S is a dollar sign.
Uh-huh.
And it's by Cheryl Atkinson,
Ah.
who really fits my definition of an investigative journalist. And what she explains with examples going back 20 something years, the power of the pharmaceutical industry and the media. So they broadly speaking, they represent 75% of advertising revenue.
Yes.
And that obviously has an effect because you can't. I mean, Tucker Carlson, for instance, was removed from Fox News, for that reason.
Yeah.
Um, and so you've got this political influence, which is also Aaron Kheriaty, one of the books I read on the subject. He was one of the ethical doctors. He found out that 72% of senators and congressmen had received checks from the pharmaceutical industry in the 2020 election.
Wow.
And then there's the revolving doors, and then the committees. I mean, this applies to the UK as well. All the sort of medical and vaccine committees, they all have conflicts of interest, and so this has really been happening progressively, and it applies to big food and agriculture as well, and also the FTC, the federal, the communications, FCC, Federal
Yeah.
Communications.
Network. Yeah.
And so there's been an industry capture, and then it's so expensive to get elected these days that people need to be paid to campaign their negative campaigns, and they have to raise a huge amount of money. Where's that going to come from?
Right.
And so you've got a level of corruption within the medical and pharmaceutical system, which is really unprecedented. And COVID gave the opportunity for this all to be rolled out. And I think the broader sort of remit behind this is the biosecurity complex. And so you've got biosecurity being used as a lever towards centralized world government.
Yeah.
This is something that the Rockefellers have been involved in for 100 years.
Yes.
And if you go back to 9/11 and the anthrax attacks,
Yes.
then that the weaponization and the gain of function research began about that stage. And the iniquitous thing, from my point of view, is that this is supposed to be a biodefense initiative. But what you do is I'm sure you know this, your readers, your listeners may be familiar, but you enhance the lethality of the virus, and then you develop a vaccine against it
Yeah.
at the same time. And this should be illegal.
Totally.
But there are 13,000 scientists worldwide working in this area, and the EcoHealth Alliance is the best known one in this. And so the power that has been accumulated in the system by the pharmaceutical industry, and in conjunction with the agencies, and Tony Fauci is a very good example of this.
Yeah.
So RFK Jr. said it just become a kind of incubation, CDC, NIH, to become incubation for development of drugs, on which the agencies then make profits through
Yeah.
commissions, millions of dollars a year. And so I think you've got what you're dealing with here is economic and political forces which have corrupted the integrity of the system, so that those few relatively doctors and even politicians who went against the grain, they lost their reputations, lost their jobs, and they were deplatformed. Aaron Kheriaty is one of those. Peter McCullough, the Pierre Corey, Paul Marrick. I mean, these are just examples of taken out. I mean, these are all highly prestigious people
Yes.
who started using early treatment and the hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. And the problem for the system was that if these were shown to work, then there would be no emergency use authorization for the vaccines, so-called, and therefore there'd be not a lot of money to be made because repurposed drugs they aren't at all profitable.
Yeah. The other element to this is I don't know if you saw any of the videos Naomi Klein did after she put the team of, I don't know, 2,500 people together to go through the 75,000 pages of Pfizer documents. And she showed that many of the patents for the vaccines were actually held by the Chinese military, and that DARPA is involved, and that the Google's secret military arm is involved. And she basically was saying this is a secret military operation against humanity.
Well, DARPA was involved in giving. They gave $25 million in about 2012 to Pfizer and Moderna to develop the mRNA platform, and so and then the other thing to mention in this context is the Event 201, which was a scenario planning for exactly the kind of event that actually happened only a few weeks later.
Right.
And whatever you think about the origins and who's responsible for what, the actual planning of the public response and the way it was rolled out, it was exactly prefigured in Event 201. And Robert Kennedy's books, The Real Anthony Fauci and the Wuhan Cover-Up, they give huge amount of documented background on the whole development of bioweapons, and how far back this goes, into the 1930s, and obviously the Nazis in the 1930s and 1940s, and this was all. It's part of the militarization of the planet, which is one of the areas that actually worries me most.
Me too.
Is that the military intelligence complex seems to have taken over everything, and and this is another element of corruption, I think.
Yeah, it's quite scary, actually. I curious if you have any thoughts on what you feel the best thing that we, the people, can do so that we don't end up seeing this thing just get progressively worse.
Well, I think the bird flu scare that's going on at the moment is out of the same playbook.
Yeah.
And they've been doing gain of function on bird flu, just as they did with previous viruses, previous SARS viruses even, and and so I think that as I say, that it's an attempt towards centralized control and manipulation, and what we've also seen very clearly is the enormous use of propaganda and censorship.
Yeah.
And this is just being rolled back at the moment. And in my view, had Kamala Harris come in and won the election, that then
We'd be dead.
this would have been intensified. And so I think one needs to have a very clear head in looking at these issues and to see what interests are behind them.
Yeah, that kind of the question I'm really trying to get at and hear your thoughts is, it's most people are so overwhelmed they don't know what to do. I mean, RFK says just say no, which I think is wise. For all the reasons we've been discussing, and most people listening to my podcast are very hip to. But it seems like one of the things that's been great for me to see is so many lawsuits getting won. And during the pandemic, there was a number of cases where the lawyers defending somebody that was being attacked for not getting vaccinated or whatever said, you must show me the physical evidence of the virus. And every single court case where the lawyer demanded that got thrown out because they could not provide it. And so I'm just curious as to what your tips are moving forward so that people don't fall further into this trap.
Well, I think that there's really a kind of war which has been going on for 100 years, between the pharmaceutical and the naturopathic
Yeah,
approaches to health, or even the Chinese approach. And so one is about selling drugs, and the other is about remaining healthy.
yeah,
And even the business model, necessarily of the pharmaceutical industry, is you have to keep people on your treatments in
yeah.
order to keep bringing in the profits. If you cure too many people quickly, then they're not going to be on the drug for long enough. And so there's a systemic issue to this as well. I think so, and in that sense, you could say that maybe this whole industry should be in the public domain,
Yes.
and shouldn't be a for-profit enterprise, precisely because of this kind of dilemma, that your focus fundamentally on profits or health.
Yeah, the problem is, as you know, they're so deep inside of every government around the world that it's like, okay, how are we going to get them out of there? Because to make a change like that is a government process. But that's, as the old saying, the devil's favorite place to hide is in the church. So it's kind of like going to the devil to clean
Yes.
up the church.
Well, I did. I mean, I'm very interested just to see how these confirmation processes go at the moment, because there's huge pushback, particularly against RFK Jr. becoming HHS secretary, and understandably from the pharmaceutical point of view, but also Jay Bhattacharya becoming, the director of NIH, which is a game-changing appointment, because he was one of the co-authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, and he got it right.
Yeah.
That's what the governments should broadly have done, and he's a man of the utmost integrity, as far as I can see, and that's what's missing in politics generally, is that everybody's on the make.
Right.
Uh, and if you're not on the make while you're in office, then you make sure you're on the make when you come out of office,
Yeah.
by getting directorships and writing your autobiography, and so on. And so it's the I think what one has to get back to is this sense of fundamental values. And in the Scottish parliamentary mace is quite instructive in this respect, because there are four qualities or four moral virtues on the mace, and there's wisdom, integrity, compassion, justice. And what I've suggested is that every member of Scottish Parliament, and indeed every member of Parliament, should have to take some kind of oath to uphold these values.
Yes.
And the great statesmen are people who do uphold these kind of values, and they're in it for public service, for noble reasons, rather than just to make their reputation and get a peerage and go to the House of Lords if you're in the UK.
Yeah, I think that the qualities you just mentioned should be mandatory worldwide for all government service and for medical service. I mean, you know, I've never seen such an abortion of the Hippocratic Oath as the COVID vaccine program and all the payoffs. I mean, and the fake death certificates. I mean, I actually often ask myself, where do these people's kids live? Where do they eat? You know, when you look at all the stuff's going on, from environmental stuff to medicine to financial corruption to chemtrails, I mean, the list is so long. I just keep saying, like, where do these people think they're going to live? Because they're destroying their own home, they're destroying their own environment. And, you know, you can't take money with you when you're dead. And it's almost like we've got a collection of, I hate to say it, but serious psychopaths in very high positions that are willing to destroy everything and everyone for the idea of profit and control without realizing they're slitting their own throat.
Well, I think I'd like just take this onto the metaphysical level,
Yeah.
because I think from what we know about the near-death experience, and I've written a book devoted particularly to this theme in the Life Review, it is that what you do to other people, effectively you're doing to yourself.
Yes.
And so if people knew when they came onto the planet that the purpose of life is to learn to love and to grow wiser, and that's it. That is and to pursue truth,
Yeah.
and to enact justice, and to be a good person.
Yes.
And that's really what life's about. But if you don't if you don't realize that this is the kind of spiritual operating system of the universe, then you make a lot of mistakes, in inverted commas.
Yeah. It's sad.
Yes, I think there's one other point to make about the science issue, is this whole notion of consensus.
Yeah.
That the consensus says, or science says, and there's science is an open process, whereby people agree and disagree about evidence and interpretations. And so to say that there's a crushing kind of consensus that requires you to believe certain things and to behave in certain ways is not true to the scientific spirit.
Hi, everybody. My family and I love Organifi's green juices. You can get your green juice in two excellent flavors, crisp apple and original mint. Not only are these products made with certified organic ingredients to support your family's nutritional needs, they each have some unique benefits. Your green juice crisp apple eases stress with an effective dose of 600 milligrams of ashwagandha per serving. Helps reduce cortisol spikes that increase snacking urges and aids keeping your blood sugar balanced. Why snack on inferior foods that lack nutrition and often lead to blood sugar spikes followed by blood sugar crashes when Organifi's green juices are super healthy, taste great, and are as quick to make as opening the package and adding water. Your green juice crisp apple is made from fresh apples picked right off the branch and are packed with micronutrients to support your body's needs. Green Juice Original Mint contains ashwagandha, chlorella, and spirulina. Reset your body every morning with 11 detoxifying superfoods. You'll love the delicious taste and your body will feel strong and stable with all the micronutrients in each serving. Green Juice Original Mint promotes balanced cortisol and stress levels, perfect for weight management, and helps rid the body of harmful toxins. Personally, I'm super grateful that Organifi makes such excellent, easy-to-use drinks and foods that keep us energized, healthy, and clean inside while decreasing the urge to crave on inferior snack foods. My kids love both flavors, and I love knowing that we can all be healthy together with Organifi's excellent crisp apple and original mint green juices. These products are excellent for work, on the road, sharing with friends, and anytime you need a nutritious boost that tastes good. To get your crisp apple and original mint green juices, go to organifi.com/Chek20. That's Organifi.com/Chek20. Save 20% on your purchase using the code Chek20, all caps, on checkout. Don't worry if you forget your Living 4D discount code because you'll see it right there on the landing page. Enjoy Organifi's excellent green juices. I happen to remember a quote by J.S. Haldane.
Okay.
A little bit of nonsense repeated regularly for just 10 years can wipe out 100 years of truth. And I think that's very true, but I also think that the inverse has to be true. And I think it's up to us to repeat as much common sense and truth as often as possible for 10 years to wipe out 100 years of nonsense. And I think it's up to us all to do our best to share what we know to be true and share research. And the one thing that made me happy as a clam was the very technology they were using to try to control us, largely the internet, got used against them. And people like Joe Rogan and Russell Brand and countless other podcasters, so they couldn't control that dragon. And thank God for that, But I think these kinds of conversations like we're having right now, they help people progressively get more clear and get more confident and feel safer sharing their viewpoints. And I think we really need to spread, a truth virus and inspire people to stand up for their sovereignty and bring the consciousness up.
Yes. Well, I think and I think 2025 is going to be quite a pivotal year. in that respect, because the we are in an evolutionary process, but it's in danger of being derailed.
Yes.
And I think the cycles. There are cycles of civilization where there's a rise and fall, there's a creation and a decay,
Yes.
and we're in a paradoxical situation, in my view, at the moment, whereby we've got this huge technical progress, but in fact we've got spiritual and moral regress
Right.
in society as a whole,
Yes.
and that's all also being used by the media companies, to undermine people, because they make more money if they can make people addicted.
Yes. Yeah. It's a we're in a very interesting time. Um, I said to my soul one day, I said, did we know we were going to be coming into a world all screwed up like this and with all these problems? And my soul said, you came here because of this. And I said,
Yeah.
oh my God, what's wrong with me?
No, I agree with that, and I think the one of the metaphors you could use is the sword of the spirit, and the sword is both a metaphor for a warrior, but it's also a metaphor for truth,
Yeah,
cutting away lies and deception and error.
yeah.
And I use it occasionally in some of my poems, and I would like to have a chance of reading a couple of poems sometime during
Yeah,
the talk.
your poems are fantastic. I've heard you read a few of them over the series of the lectures that I've listened to. Um, if you want to read one right now, go ahead.
Yes, why don't I'll do that. I'll do this one that I dedicated to Peter Fenwick, um, which is called "It is Always Time," and you just need to find, uh, and this is really the what matters. Um, it is always time, dedicated to my beloved friend and colleague Dr. Peter Fenwick, 1935 to 2024, for whom it was always time to care. The silent mountains speak eternal truth within our souls from their depth of time. It is always time to be still, to remember who we are, to be present in the center of our being, to flow towards the one and towards each other. It is always time for compassion, to be rooted and grounded in love, to comfort the afflicted, to care and share with each other. It is always time to be true and loyal, to be noble and civil, to be courteous and kind towards each other. It is always time for honor and integrity, time for courage. It is always time for truth, time for wisdom. It is always time for goodness, time for beauty. This meeting of eternity and time is always here and now, is always present, is always to be embodied, to be enacted by each and all together.
Yeah, a huge dose of truth right there. Yeah,
Well, of principles, and one of the inspirations for that poem was the ethic of the Cathars,
oh, yes.
the,
Yep.
the historical Albigensian
Yep.
Albigensian trade, but particularly the Occitan culture, because they had this notion of what's called parace, Paratge, and what it was this combination of chivalry, honor, loyalty, but also compassion and
Yeah.
decency. And there was a way in which you acted and a way in which you shouldn't act and didn't act. And so there was a nobility of outlook and nobility of soul, which went along with this. And this is fundamentally what we need to recover as a culture, in order to uh, bring about spiritual renaissance and cultural renewal.
Yeah, I read a book on the Cathars. It was very, very interesting, and they really they really the book talked about how the Christian church tried to round them up and get rid of them all, and at one point they captured a whole city, and they had 200 of the Cathars, and they gave them a choice to convert to Christianity or be killed. They said they were going to put them in a building and light it on fire, and all 200 of them said, "We will choose death," and they all went in the building and died together.
Well, plenty of that happened on quite a number of different occasions. But the important point is that they regarded themselves as the true Christians who were following what Christ had taught.
Yeah,
And they regarded that Rome, the church, as the Antichrist, because they were prioritizing power and not love,
right.
whereas the Cathars were prioritizing love.
Yeah,
And that's what we should be doing now.
yeah, and it's interesting too because I've actually had a couple of people that are quite knowledgeable in this area try to convince me that the Cathars never existed, that it's made up. But I don't know. I have a hard time with that. I get too much sense of authenticity in the story myself. Have you got any thoughts on that regard?
Oh, totally. I mean, the Cathars were forgotten for many hundreds of years, and it was only in a 3-volume history of the Albigensians by Napoleon Perrat in about 1870, which started the revival of interest in the Cathars, and more recently in the late 40s, there was a Center for Cathar Studies set up, and also a journal, which was set up by a man called Déodat Rocher. And so it's now there's a whole sort of small cottage academic industry looking into the Cathars. But in fact, and what your readers won't be aware of is that there is a continuity which comes right up into our own time, and which is represented by the people who released the gospel of the beloved companion to the world in 2010, which is subtitled Complete Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And so the role of Mary Magdalene in all of this, and the role of the feminine in relation to spirituality in the church, is absolutely critical for our time. And if you go to the main Catholic church in Foix, and you look at a frieze of the Last Supper, which is at ground level, you'll find Mary Magdalene sitting next to Jesus.
Yeah, that's great.
Actually, in a Catholic church, and it's an explosive piece of artistic evidence.
I love it. Have you, by chance, ever read the book When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone?
I've read similar books, but not that.
It's a great book.
Yes,
It
yeah.
really shows how destructive the Christian religion was and has been throughout to women, and talks about the period where we were more matriarchal, and the transition, and just how devastating Christianity's been to women and how they treated women, and all the too much to get into in a few minutes, but pretty powerful book that really it took my awareness of the depth of the darkness in what I call corporate Christianity to a whole new level. And another book that you might find very interesting is the one that I read. It's called The Spiritual Roots of the Tarot, The Cathar Code to Enlightenment by Russell Sturgis.
Yes. No, I think I have actually read that book.
It's a great book.
Very, very interesting.
He's been on my podcast, and I just did another podcast with him recently. Great guy.
Well, it's all happening from the south of France. So the Marseille tarot, that's where one of the main tarots originated, which is not so far away, and it's not far from where Mary Magdalene is meant to have landed in AD 43.
Well, what Russell Sturgis proposes in his book is that because the Cathars are being so heavily pursued by the Christians, they coded their practices in the major arcana of the tarot so they looked like stained glass windows in churches, and they could leave them laying around right in front of people, and they didn't really understand what they were. But he explains the whole history of the Cathars, and what each of the major arcana means from the perspective of the path to enlightenment. And I really think there's a lot of merit to that
Yes, I
concept.
found that book very, very interesting, exactly for that reason, because you had to find other ways of putting across your teaching
Yeah,
that weren't so obviously heretical.
yeah, it's a very good book. My next query is science versus nature and humanity. I've had James Tunney on my podcast 4 or 5 times now to discuss his research and books on scientism, transhumanism, globalism, and related challenges. Tunney makes it very clear that what we're experiencing in the world is part of a plan that goes back 100 years or more. This fact is also expressed in the excellent book DNA, Pirates of the Sacred Spile by Leonard Horowitz, MD. In my studies of the history of sciences, it's quite clear that Francis Bacon is credited for changing the definition of science from working with nature to using science to control nature. The COVID pandemic was a glaring and even shocking example of the many ways science is being used to attempt to control both nature and human nature. What do you feel science has become, and what do you see as the future of science and the ramifications of using science the way it has been being used since Bacon's time?
Well, I think what underlies this is the mechanistic worldview and the removal of the human from nature, so that in the Renaissance period you had the anima mundi,
Yeah.
and the world had a soul, so the world had an inside, the world the earth was conscious, in a sense. And I think
Yes.
that's in parenthesis. That's partly what we're trying to recover. And then in the 17th and 18th century, you got the rise of the mechanical worldview with Galileo, Locke, and a move away from Neoplatonism, and Descartes, of course.
Yeah.
And then you got this split off between the masculine and the feminine, between humans and nature. And that meant that if nature was an object, then nature could be exploited.
Yes.
And the whole economic system we have at the moment is based on using nature for human ends. But I just want to put a slight caveat on how Bacon is seen, because this is the kind of the standard view, and there's obviously evidence for it that Bacon put nature on a rack and all of that. But there was another side to Bacon, as a Rosicrucian, and so he was head of the Rosicrucians, and in a way he was the precursor of the Royal Society, the Invisible College, if you like, and he also wrote something called the New Atlantis, which was his kind of vision of what could happen, which the US tried to enact in a sense. But more than that, and this is quite controversial, but I take this view. He also wrote, or was largely responsible for the Shakespeare plays, and so what Bacon's approach, and my friend Peter Dawkins, can explain this in great detail, was that there needed to be an education about nature, an education for the spirit, and then an education for the emotions. And so, an education for the emotions is where the plays and the poems came in, and there's it's a whole sort of separate area. But so in other words, Bacon's overall view was really the renewal of culture, and culture had to be renewed in a number of different ways, and it wasn't just science. And so his vision is actually much broader and deeper than most people give him credit for. And he was also framed, as by political forces, and
Yeah.
forced to resign by James the First. And so he's much maligned. So I want to put but the point that the thrust of your question is that it meant that science developed in a particular way, and at this point I just bring in the thought of Ian McGilchrist, because Ian's a psychiatrist and philosopher, neurologist, and
Yeah, he's a deep guy.
yeah, what he explains, and he's a very old friend of mine, is that we have a society and a system developed, dominated by the left hemisphere, and the left hemisphere is about manipulation and control.
Yeah.
It doesn't accept. It's literalistic as well. It doesn't accept the ways of truth, of intuition and imagination, um, and it's just reason and the senses. And so it has a very narrow remit. But I think what's changing things now is the expansion of the science of consciousness, and also the near-death experience. I think has had a profound effect on our outlook. And this goes back 50 years. It's 50 years since Raymond Moody published his life after life.
Right.
But because it on the basis of experience and multiple similar experiences, people were able to see that there is actually a spiritual dimension underpinning existence, which is what William James was saying over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
With his varieties of religious experience.
Yes.
And so I think there is a move towards post-materialism. But as you were talking about James Tunney, there's the opposite move, which assumes that the human being is basically a machine, and that we need to be upgraded with implants and enhanced rather than evolve our spirituality, which is the true form of evolution for me.
Are you tired of feeling stuck? Whether you're stuck in your career, your health, or your daily routine, getting out of a rut can feel overwhelming. But I'm here to offer you the push you need to escape that rut. Here is your chance to transform your life from the inside out, to break free of whatever has been holding you back, and to make a lasting change to your life and career. The Chek Academy is the answer, bringing you fulfillment and purpose with step-by-step assistance, guidance, and learning. You'll be equipped to improve your health, and if you choose, guide others through their transformation too. And because the Chek Academy is designed for full-time workers, you can make this life-changing leap while still managing your regular day-to-day commitments. In year 1, you'll gain tools and strategies that really work, not quick fixes that are unsustainable. Starting with Paul's book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, you'll learn how to build healthy habits. Then you'll expand on these in Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1 online. Integrated Movement Science Level 1 online and the prerequisites will show you how to train with confidence and precision. Chek mentors and faculty are there to guide and support you as you progress, as well as the community of your fellow students in the Chek Academy. We're now accepting applications for the spring enrollment, but don't wait, as these close on March 31st. So go to chek.group/L4D Academy. That's chek.group/L4D Academy. You know your best self is just waiting for you to make the decision. So come join us and turn 2025 into the year your vision becomes your reality.
One of the things that's deeply concerning to me, have you ever seen the book Control Oligarchs by Seamus Bruner?
I just reviewed it.
Oh,
yes.
Excellent book. And,
yes, it's reviewed in the new issue.
That's fantastic, because he really shows you that these people are traumatized people and that they're not really psychologically whole people, and that they're inflicting the world with their own trauma, is my own interpretation of it. But, when you look at Bill Gates and how he's trying to catalog everything in nature and chip everything, and you got all this, you've got these smart dust now being sprayed all over the place, and they're trying to, and they're doing loans to countries where they trade them their resources for money. And so they're actually selling out rights to all their resources. So they're ultimately basically taking the commons and converting them to private ownership. And I think that's extremely dangerous.
Yes, and I think that there are financial instruments being developed as well, to monetize nature, as it were.
Yes.
And so it's another development of the financial system, and that's one of the things that's happened since the 1980s, is that the real economy has become secondary to the financial economy, which has always been driven by the banks anyway, and the central bankers and the bankers are the ultimate control oligarchs behind all of this, I think.
Yeah. It's a nerve wracking, quite frankly. I used to be a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division. And when the day COVID started, I have two wives, Angie and Penny. I said to them both, I was trained to protect the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic. And I said, I never thought I'd see the day that my own country would become my enemy and our enemy. And, I got out of the 82nd Airborne Division because it really bothered me inside that I could be sent off at any time to kill people that I didn't know were guilty of actually being a threat to the United States.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, if I can't even ask for evidence that the people that I'm going to go kill are actually a threat to our country, then I'm a damn idiot if I jump on that airplane and go, murder people. And so I
Well,
had to
yes,
get
I think
out.
there's been a conflation between dissident, being a dissident, which is an honourable position, and identifying people who don't go along with the narrative as domestic terrorists and
Right.
extremists. So I
Yeah.
think the vocabulary, I mean, there's a whole vocabulary that's been developed over the last few years, which is largely a kind of propaganda type vocabulary, where misinformation, malinformation, disinformation, and those really apply to anything which is not in agreement with the narrative. And so one of the most important forms of control that we're subjected to is narrative control.
Yes.
Um, and books have been written, studies have been written about this, and people, the conclusion is that if you control the narrative, then you're controlling perception and you're controlling behavior, and that is true. That was true of COVID. It's certainly true of the Ukraine situation, and it's true of many other issues as well. And so
Yeah.
you really have to think, you have to make sure that you've got enough diversity of sources, so that you're getting all sides of the argument, not just the mainstream. And a lot of it's accompanied by demonization as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if it's like a kind of cardboard cutout, and then you fill in the name, whether it's Gaddafi, or Saddam Hussein, or Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
They're the devil incarnate, and we're the good guys.
Yeah.
And we're fighting the good fight against
Yeah.
the bad guys. And it's just so simplistic and binary. We need to get beyond all this.
Well, what's very disturbing to me is that, of course, I'm an American. What our tax dollars are being used to pay for is devastating, and it always makes me very sad that people around the world in other countries have this view of Americans that's based on how our government behaves and our military gets involved in things. But they don't realize most Americans are disgusted with the fact that their tax dollars are being used in that way and they have no control over it. And I think, when you get, like the number of protests I've seen with Islamic people just saying how they hate Christianity and hate United States and they want to kill everybody. And I mean, this is some radical kind of jihadist type behavior, but a lot of this comes not from the true nature of the American people. It's the way the deep state is presenting the American people to the world. And then, of course, it is our tax dollars largely that's funding all this stuff. And I think it's the same in many countries in their own way. And I just think it's a real problem. And I don't I don't know how we're going to get out of it. I mean, I one of the questions I wanted to ask you is I'm a bit confused about Elon Musk because he seems to do some great things, but he's also very involved in, chipping people and transhumanism type stuff. And I just recently saw a post where he started some new financial system. He's offering people $10,000 just to sign up. And I'm like, I guess he's trying to create his own financial system. And I just can't figure him out. I wonder what your thoughts are.
No, I agree. I think he has upsides and downsides, because until I mean he obviously is, if he's got all these satellites going up and there's military involved in that, and so he's
Yep.
tied in with that.
Yep.
And as you say, he's a technocrat.
Yep.
His grandfather was one of the original technocrats in the 1930s. And but at the same time, I've listened to a number of interviews by him, and he's a very well informed, bright guy,
Yep.
who has an emphasis on sovereignty,
Yes.
and so he is defending sovereignty, and and he buying Twitter, and he obviously was going to try and make it into something which would make it very financially viable, but in the short run, all the advertisers disappeared. And he lost an enormous amount of money. I mean, it's the amount of money that only he could afford to lose.
Yeah.
But it upheld free speech, and so the people I've been following, like Peter McCullough and Robert Malone and others. I mean, interesting. I don't know whether you've seen this book. I was going to point it out. This is his most recent one, called Psy
War.
Wars, with written with his wife.
And who's the author?
Robert and Jill Malone. So,
Okay.
but they've and I knew quite a lot of what it is already, but I mean, it's an eye opener in terms of the history of psychological operations and how they're deployed against people. And so I think that I'm concerned about the takeover of technocracy and the implants and everything, like James Tunney has also been arguing. There's always a medical front to a lot of these developments. Wonderful development in medicine, but then as soon as you start applying it more widely, then you can see the results are not at all what they're made out to be.
Right.
But I think that some people have become so enamored of these technological developments, and I got a colleague at the moment doing some research in this, and he's writing a report on transhumanism, which will come out in the Galileo Commission in the next couple of months.
Great.
And he's found that a lot of people are quite open to having the implant if it's going to improve their performance, and it'll be sold with these kind of messages. And for young people who are so plugged in, and let me show you another book, which is a very important one, which I'm going to be talking to the author. This here, it's and you can see that your Stone Age brain in the screen age.
Good.
By Richard Saitovich, coping with digital distraction and sensory overload. And so this is he has a whole chapter on silence, where he says that silence can and walking in nature can be an antidote, to the brain overload of immersing ourselves in these technologies.
Yeah, the amount of information. I think Robert O. Becker, in his book *The Body Electric*, said that. I think that book was written around 1990 or 91, but he said at that time of writing the book, the human being at that time would have more information moving through their brain and sensory systems in one day than a person in the year 1900 had in their entire lifetime.
Well, it's orders of magnitude more now.
Oh yeah, it's magnitudes, just way, way higher. And I think this is one of the reasons we have so many problems with anxiety disorders and a lot of psychological breakdown. And I read a paper years ago by a guy named Ross Addy, because I was doing research on the potential for brain cancer, because I had a lot of people having problems that I track back to potentially being on cell phones too much. And Ross Addy said that the signal on a cell phone is 1 million times more powerful than the signal that your brain cells use to communicate with each other. And that when you're holding a phone to your head, if the signal, for example, if the window of a building is over there and your phone's on the opposite ear, that signal's going right through your brain. And, the way I tell my students how to make an analogy of that, I say, imagine if I was talking to you and all of a sudden the sound of my voice was multiplied by 1 million times. It would blow
Yeah.
your eardrums right out of your head,
Well,
and it would
quite.
probably blow the furniture apart. And so I think, plus all the electromagnetic aspects of it, you start putting chips in people's bodies and you've got a constant stream of electromagnetic stress that can be very, very disruptive on many, many levels. And I think there's
Well,
so much evidence of that. It's unbelievable.
I know I agree with that, but also that again this militarization of these applications is such that the 6G and some of the technology that's being developed can be a two-way system where the brain is effectively wired up to the internet even if you don't know it.
Yes.
And this can be used to manipulate. It can be used for enemy action, as it were. It can be used to manipulate people. And one of the main people who I was listening to, James Giordano, George Washington University, he was talking about this, and he, in a totally unethical way, and yet he's a professor of neuroethics,
Oh, wow.
which I find a little bit anomalous, because
Yeah.
the thing is that if we lose our humanity, then we've lost everything.
Yep.
And there's this mechanistic thinking of treating people as objects, and this applies to troops and in with the Ukraine situation, for instance, a lot of the senior military and senators are saying it's a great war because we're not all it's Ukrainians who are dying on the field, not Americans.
Oh, God.
And we're achieving the geostrategic aim, which I don't think they are, weakening Russia. That's what the
Yeah.
whole thing is about.
Yeah.
And so this whole way of thinking, which goes back to Brzezinski, is totally alien to me, because I feel that what we should, as Russell and Einstein said in the 1950s, said, remember your humanity and forget the rest.
Yeah.
This is what we need to be doing. We need to be becoming more human, not less human.
Yes. Yeah. I remember reading a quote where somebody asked Einstein, I'm sure you've heard of this one. They said, how do you think the Third World War will be fought? And Einstein said, I don't know, but the Fourth World War will be fought with sticks and
Yeah.
stones. And that's the
Yeah.
real problem we've got to face.
Well, people are looking at these strategic analysts, they're looking at things in a kind of abstract percentage way, which is exactly what the advisors, to Kennedy and Khrushchev were doing in the 1960s. They were, 60 million, they will lose, we might only lose 30 million. I mean, even if you have these thoughts,
Yeah.
then you've just completely lost your humanity.
Yeah. It's
Um,
almost like being a cyborg or a machine with no emotion whatsoever. It's,
Our emotions are also, and our spirituality is really what makes us human.
yes.
And it's, the women, I think, have a hugely important role to play here. And Peter Dudhoff
Yes.
already said this 100 years ago. He said that the way in that women and feminine values and caring and the heart, this is the future.
Are you familiar with Federico Fagin?
Very, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I just did a
Uh,
podcast with him. I've read his first book and parts of his second book. And I had a talk with him about AI and all this tech. But one of the things I brought up with him that concerns me is that the more we use external technology to do the thinking that we should be doing, the more atrophied we become. So we actually become almost useless if there's no batteries or no power all of a sudden. And I'll give you an example of this. It's a little bit embarrassing, but I'll share it. Years and years ago, when digital watches first came out, you probably remember that, I thought, well, this is cool. I wasn't all tapped into all this stuff at that time. I was a young man, but I got this digital watch, and one day I was working away. I owned a physical therapy clinic, and I was working away, and I had, for some reason, I think I took my watch off because I was doing manual therapy on a patient's neck, and I needed to see what time it was so I didn't go too long with the client. And I turned and looked at the clock, and I, for the life of me, couldn't remember how to tell time.
Oh
I'm
God.
like, oh my
Yeah.
God, I forgot how to tell time. And so from that day on, I got rid of my digital watch. And I thought, what's the consequence of it going to be as we use more and more, AI to think for us, and computers to think for us, and brain chips to scan the internet. And, it's like we're going to turn into, Federico Fagin and I both agreed that the more machine you interact with, the more machine-like you become.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Federico, that his latest book, Irreducible, is a game changer,
Yeah,
in my view. And he came to speak at our Galileo Commission meeting in in Asolo in Italy in September. So it's the last time I saw him. And he's also speaking at the major Science of Consciousness conference in Barcelona next year. And so that we are making progress towards a more post-materialist understanding of consciousness and reality.
yeah. What I told Federico to bring this point up, when I was my job in the 82nd Airborne Division was to repair weapon systems on Cobra helicopters, and I had to spend a year in electronics school, and I had to go to math school to get into electronics school, which I didn't enjoy at all because I'm not wired that way. But I did okay and graduated and got through it. But the interesting thing is, and I told Federico this, I said, we were not even allowed to use calculators. We had to do everything longhand. We had to be able to build all our circuits, circuit loads, problem solve, all with a pencil and a piece of paper, because the instructor said, if you're in a battlefield and your equipment gets damaged and you don't know how to do this, you will die, and you will be disabled. You could get taken over. So you must know how to do it in your own
Yeah,
mind.
that's a
And
very good point.
yeah,
I know in the time that I was brought up, we learned our times tables, and we did everything like this, in mentally. Um,
our instructors would go one step further. When they were grading tests, if they saw that you got the right answer, but they intuitively sensed you didn't know how you got it, they would make you come to the front of the classroom and explain every step of the equations. And if you could not tell them exactly how point A got to point B to point C, they would mark it wrong, even though you got it right. And to me,
well, that
that's
reminds
real learning.
Well, that reminds me of a story of Alan Turing,
Yeah,
because he had this. He'd intuitively know the answer, which would be correct, and then he'd have to work all the way backwards to see how he could arrive there.
right. Hi, everybody. I'm sure you've heard me bragging about Paleo Valley over the years of listening to my podcast, and there's a very good reason for that. Not only do I love the genius of Autumn Smith, a holistic nutritionist, but her products are phenomenally good. My kids love them, I love them, and we all use them every day. My students love them, my clients love them, and they are absolutely top notch. One of my kids' favorite snacks is Paleo Valley's bone broth in chocolate. They love to make their hot chocolate drink themselves simply by whisking up collagen-rich protein powder in a mug of hot water. And I'm happy to let them indulge, as I know it is packed full of great nutrition for them in the disguise of a sweet treat. Even us big kids love our sweet treats, and isn't it great when we can enjoy something that not only tastes great, but is truly great for us? Paleo Valley's 100% grass-fed bone broth protein is the only of its kind made from truly grass-fed cows raised on pesticide-free grass pastures. It's made from bones, not hides, slowly simmered to extract the proteins and nutrients. Gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and dairy-free, the chocolate mix includes organic coconut milk powder, organic cacao bean, organic monk fruit that makes
a sweet, creamy, delicious drink that my kids, family, and friends just can't get enough of. You can also add to smoothies, use it in baking, or mix it with your coffee for a healthy mocha treat. Paleo Valley's bone broth protein is also available in vanilla and unflavored. And I promise you, not only will you love this stuff, your kids will love it. You can giggle and laugh because they think they're getting a sweet dessert right before bed, but they will love it and sleep great. And boy, do we parents love it when our kids sleep great. Enjoy Paleo Valley's amazing products.
In addition to chocolate, Paleo Valley's bone broth protein comes in vanilla, an unflavoured option, great for adding a boost to your baking, soups and stews, and also their new and delicious salted caramel flavour, which is now the favourite in the Chek household. Try Paleo Valley's bone broth protein and save 15% on your purchase by going to paleovalley.com/Chek15. That's paleovalley.com/CHEK15. We hope you enjoy Paleo Valley's bone broth protein just as much as we do.
Very interesting. My next question is a bit of a shift, yet equally important. Jung states in his writing that the Imago Dei archetype is the archetype from which all archetypes emerge within the human psyche. He also states that it is unclear whether the Imago Dei creates us or we create it. The first statement ultimately means that our beliefs or non-beliefs about God have the greatest influence on the psyche or mind and how we perceive and relate to the world. Can you share your thoughts on Jung's statements? And if you agree with Jung, what are the ramifications of our God image or ideas on the way we relate to ourselves, others, and the world, and how is this significant to the issues that we all face today?
Well, that's quite a complex question.
Well, you're a smart guy.
I'll start by saying that one of the books I read on that trip I took to France and Germany was the book called The Evolution of the Idea of God.
Right.
And it was by a man called Grant Allen, and it was published in about 1900, and so he was an early reader of J.G. Fraser. And so what's very clear to me, and I'm sure it was equally clear to Jung, is that our ideas of God do evolve, and that there's an evolution between Old Testament Yahweh and the New Testament, the God of love. And so you get a God of power, and you get a God of love, and then but the institution tends to prioritize, the structure of power at least. And so what Jung, I mean, I've read a lot of Jung. In fact, I have his complete works in my library.
So do I.
And what he was getting at was this, obviously this. I mean, the key word for me in this whole area is reciprocity. Eckhart expressed it very well when he said, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me."
Yes.
And so to come to know, ultimately, that your essence is that same divine consciousness, which is called gnosis, is the ultimate human realization. And then a corollary of that is that everyone else is also structurally a microcosm of the macrocosm of the divine mind, and therefore has same intrinsic value as any other person.
Yeah.
And so then you ask, well, how do you treat each other? Well, you treat each other in terms of intrinsic value, and which one contrasts with instrumental value, where the person is simply a means to your end.
Right.
And there's far too much of this instrumentalism in our modern worldview, where people are simply a means to somebody else's end. And so the Imago Dei, I know you wanted to come on to this, he equates this with the self, the capital S. He understood this. He knew it himself. And I suppose one of the questions that rises with Jung is the extent to which his view is ontological as well as epistemological. So epistemology, or theory of knowledge, that you get a psychology of God, which
Yeah.
is your imago Dei. But does that imply that there's a corresponding ontology? And for Jung, the question of dualism and evil was very important. And he had
Yes.
this, you might remember, he had this formative dream where he saw a huge turd coming out
Yeah.
of the divine throne, landing
I
on
cracked
Basel
up when I
Cathedral.
heard that. When I read that, I was
And
laughing my ass off.
and you can see that this influenced the way that he saw the two sides of God and the unconsciousness of God, whereby the human is one of the functions of the human is to become more conscious on God's behalf.
Yes.
So I think this is a very profound process, which he calls individuation,
Yeah.
which is also about the marriage of opposites,
Yes.
which I think is coincidentia oppositorum, which Ian McGilchrist also talks about.
Yeah.
And so I think if we understand that we are all derived from the same source, whether you call it divine or not,
Yeah.
then the way in which we relate to each other and indeed to nature should be in terms of harmony and service,
Yes.
and love and caring and compassion.
Yes. Yeah. I think the reason I was really posting the question is because when you look at a lot of the fundamentalist religious ideologies, and Ken Wilber says about 65, in some places, except up to 70% of the world population is still at the fundamentalist level of religious ideology. I don't know if you've had a chance to look into Ken Wilber's newest book, Radical Wholeness, but it's quite
No, it's on my shelf.
yeah,
Yes,
it's quite an intense warning.
Yes.
Yeah, very. He doesn't pull any punches, but the problem of being programmed by ideologies about God as opposed to the true religious experience. And one of the real powerful books that I read was The Religious Case Against Belief by James Carse, where he talks about the fact that religion cannot be based on belief, or it is not religion, because as soon as you believe something, you stop asking questions, exploring, and investigate it. You just believe. So the whole book is really showing you that you can't actually be a believer and be religious because you're just memorizing stuff and believing it, and therefore your growth stops and you act it out, which, think of all the Crusades, for example. So I think when I read a lot of Jung's work on the Imago Dei, and I also read complete books on it by Jungian analysts, but I think it's an important concept because it's a reminder to everybody that you need to be very careful about what your beliefs about God are, because they're at the very root of your projection system, and they're tainting everything that you see and perceive all around you. And if that God image divides you against other people, then you have the dangers of ethnocentric religion, which is, as you know, my group against your group. And Ken Wilber Ken Wilber says at least 3 times in his new book, religious wars are the number one cause of death, and have been throughout history because of these very ideological differences, all in the name of God, which is such a complete inversion of love and God. It's like, I've said many times on my podcast, when I was an 8-year-old in Christian Science church, being told God loves you, Jesus loves you, and then singing Onward Christian Soldiers marching off to war with the cross of Jesus going on before, I was sitting there going, this doesn't make any sense to me. And then when I would ask questions, people would not answer my questions. And I got to the point where I was scared of adults, because I'm like, how can I pick on this at 8 years old and they're not figuring it out, And so I think one of the reasons this is so important, because as you've surely noticed, COVID created enough stress, and based on consciousness research, whenever people are under a lot of stress, they revert backwards in their conscious development. So within a year of COVID, we had tons of people becoming born again Christians again. And now we've seen this huge surge of Armageddon ideology, that the end of the world is coming. There's tons of videos out there. It's all going to end. We want it to end. And like, if you get too many people thinking that way, you can create a probability wave that might be dangerous if it manifests.
Well, I think we are living in apocalyptic times. So, but apocalypse means revelation.
Yeah.
And what I think is essential, it goes back to an earlier theme, is that the corruption is revealed,
Yeah.
that the machinations are revealed, that that because people will then understand what's all behind, what's behind everything we're talking about. But coming back to your question specifically, the belief and the creed, these are forms of identity, and if you're told, particularly within Orthodox Christianity, Western Christianity, I should say, that outside the church there is no salvation, extra ecclesia nulla salus, then you're either in or you're out.
Right.
And I think that there's also a McGilchrist take on this, because the theology is a left hemisphere activity. And if you look, I've been reading last night, rereading a short book on Nicholas Berdyaev, the Russian philosopher, and he was always talking about the difference between philosophical mysticism and rationalist theology.
Yes.
And so, if you're a philosophical mystic, then you're concentrating on what unites people and what unites us to the divine and to nature. Whereas if you're a rationalist theologian, then you're into distinctions. What's the difference between this and that, and which one is right and which one is wrong? And then in the extremes, as Montaigne said, it is putting a great high value on your opinions to roast people on account of them.
Right.
And that's what we don't roast people physically so much, but we roast their reputations instead, as we've been talking about.
Well, if you look at the death toll from COVID, we do roast them physically, in one way or the other. All these wars, I mean, it's not a good thing. I had a thought there that I wanted to share with you, but it slipped out of my head. But I think all this these are all things that most people don't think about, but they should be thinking about them. And the thought that came to me while you were talking, but I didn't want to interrupt you, is that the people that have this Armageddon philosophy, these kind of dyed-in-the-wool dogmatic Christians, they're not seeing it as a transitional state or a purging. They're seeing it as the end, like the world is coming to an end. And they're promoting that and even encouraging it, which I've seen some of these lectures. I'm like, you guys are out of your friggin' minds. This is very dangerous.
Well, when you combine that with a kind of neocon foreign policy, the sort of bring it on, which is just total madness, insanity. But I think that the further along the path you go, the less you hold to the exclusive nature of your own beliefs.
Yes.
You have much greater understanding and tolerance that every path leads up the mountain.
Yes. My next question's a bit of a shift. When I did a lot of research to write my 15-volume book set, Welcome to Spirit Gym, one of the things I found through my research is that there's now approximately 37 theories of everything. None of them can give any objective proof of origins or source. They all find ways to provide mathematical validation for their thesis or hypothesis. But it seems to me that until we have some sort more solid grasp of what consciousness, we will not be able to create a reliable theory of everything. And having studied so many of these theories of everything, whether it be the electric universe, many worlds theory, string theory, ... For example, I interviewed Walt Thornhill, the chief scientist of the electric universe, who died recently. But I said to him, because I've studied the electric universe quite extensively. I've read multiple books on it. I must have watched 100 of their videos. And I said to him, you're talking about an electric universe. I went to electronics school. I know the basics of how a circuit works. There has to be a source of potential. And you're talking about amounts of electrical flow through plasma that are of a magnitude that we can't even calculate. They're so big. So where is the potential energy coming to drive all this electricity that's creating the stars and the galaxies? And he said, I don't know. Nobody knows. So there's the point I'm making. We have all these theories of everything, but ultimately they don't really have any kind of solid foundation, which factually means they're no different than a myth. They're just a scientific myth with a bunch of mathematical calculations wrapped around it. So I'm just curious as to your thoughts on these things.
Well, I don't have a theory of everything. I'm not a physicist. I mean, I've read physics and philosophy of physics, and so I know roughly what's being talked about. But I think the main point, and I'm sure Federico would have made this point as well, is that you can't have a theory of everything without consciousness.
Right.
That if you leave consciousness out, and I think more and more people are realizing this. I mean, Max Planck realized it in 1931 when he said you cannot get behind consciousness. Everything is a matrix of consciousness. Mind is the matrix of matter, he said.
Yes. Yeah.
And Schrödinger and Pauli and Heisenberg, they had similar realizations, and
Yeah.
they were the great physicists of their day.
Yes.
And I think that it goes back to the earlier part of the conversation when you remove yourself from nature, you remove mind from nature, and you remove consciousness, and then pretend that it doesn't exist. When in fact you can't do anything or make any theoretical abstractions without consciousness. It's just not possible. And so you that's where you have to start from. And you can't simply abstract it out. It's another left hemisphere move, but because it's fundamental to it's the inner. It's a book I was reading about the philosophy of Teilhard de Chardin, and he said that's what the science has missed out, the inner.
Yeah.
And so in going forward, science has to bring back the inner, which is also bringing back a qualitative understanding and not reducing everything to quantities and to the outside. And so there's a complementarity, if you like, between the inner and the outer. So any theory of everything has to include the thinking and feeling, the thinking mind and the feeling heart.
Yeah. This is one of the reasons I love the Institute of Noetic Sciences, because I really think people like Dean Radin and Russell Targ and people like that, and a lot of the researchers there and Heart Math, they're really bringing us an inner science that I think is very, very important to counterbalance the materialistic science. I don't know if you've ever seen or heard this before, but you must know who Nassim Haramein is, right?
Yeah.
I saw something so funny when he was giving a lecture. He goes, all these materialistic sciences keep claiming that consciousness is not involved in science or their equations or their conclusions. And then he goes, what do you think's moving the chalk on the board? What do you think's writing those equations? He said, how can you exclude consciousness? That's what's doing the math.
Well, he's speaking in Barcelona next year as well.
Oh, is that right? That'd be great.
Yeah. No, so there is some movement, as I say. So yes, so I think that those are my thoughts on that question.
That's great. One conception of God or highest source one's conception of God or highest source will significantly influence what people believe will happen to their body when they die and what they conceive spirit and soul to be. I know you've spoken about NDEs and the afterlife process with many guest speakers within the Scientific Medical Network, and I know you have your own opinions, and I think you said you wrote a book about it. What do you feel spirit and soul actually are, and how do these concepts relate to what you feel happens when we die?
Well, I think everybody has their own map, but I think the spirit is the essence of who we are, which is also the divine mind.
Yeah.
Or it's the instantiation of the divine mind within our own system, if you like. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the capacity that we have to to know the divine and know that we are divine.
Yes.
The soul, I mean, I heard a very interesting distinction between spirit and soul with an astrologer called Ricky Levine. I was listening to him last week, and he said that if you look at the elements, then basically the spirit is the fire and the air, and even it means breath.
Yes.
Whereas the soul represents the earth and the water. I never thought of it in that way before, and I thought that was an incredibly interesting, parsing or distinction to make, because traditionally, the spirit is more aligned with the masculine, and the soul with the feminine,
Yes.
with the heart. Um, and, and I think the soul, from a kind of metaphysical point of view, is the animating principle, which animates the physical body, and which is an individualization of the divine, and we're entwined with matter, as we're speaking at the moment. But
Yeah.
I think we are capable of, our consciousness is capable of existing apart from the material body. There's a lot of evidence for this, although I think
Yeah.
it's still part of an evolutionary journey, and I'm not sure that we can understand the mechanics, in inverted commas, from the point of view of being in the physical world.
Yeah. The way I describe spirit and soul to my students and my patients is I say that if you are playing a shaman's drum, and let's say you're doing a healing on somebody and you're intuiting what rhythm will be best to heal them, it's the flow of energy and information coming through you that's making the drumstick move in the right rhythm. But the soul is the drum and the skin. And when the drum stick hits the skin, it vibrates and you have an experience. So spirit needs soul to have an experience, and the skin represents the membrane between the implicate order of Bohm and the explicate order as a membrane where you get spirit manifesting as tangible vibration or experience. And it seems to help people understand that. So I tell them spirit is the flow of energy information, such as thought and feeling, but the experience of playing the drum, or the experience of getting the healing, or the experience of kissing your lover or making love, that's the domain of the soul.
Well, that's certainly one way of putting it. I mean, there are many different ways of parsing, as I say, these categories. And I was just reading a piece about Orthodox prayer, and it said what you have to do is to bring the mind into the heart.
Yes.
And I really like that. And so that would be symbolically, that would bring spirit and soul together, to bring the mind into the heart.
Yeah, I read a book on myth that was really good. I can't remember the author's name, but he said something profound in there. He said, only the heart can deliver justice to the head. And I thought that was really profound. I think it's very true.
Yeah.
Because if you try to make judgments without your heart, you can be very rational and logical, but you can really be very off the mark, without the feeling element of it. Because, like if we can have a lot of logic, but we can be detached from the field of value. For example, I'm going to do whatever I got to do to make a lot of money, no matter what it does to people. So there's logic without the heart involved in it, or with the feeling aspects of it. And I think that's part of the problem. And I think that's why Ian McGilchrist's teachings on the left-right brain qualities and relationships is so important.
Well, it's a matter, as he always says, of balance.
Yeah.
We have to balance these faculties and these ways of thinking, not give priority to one or the other.
Yes. My next question is, having studied consciousness and related research quite extensively, one area of confusion and disagreement that extends itself directly into religion is what the unconscious is and the actual nature and relationship with spirit, soul, and the conscious mind. Some, for example, do not distinguish between the unconscious mind and the subconscious mind. David, what do you feel is the actual nature and function of the unconscious? And how do you distinguish the unconscious from the subconscious, and why are these distinctions important?
Well, again, it's a mapping question.
Uh-huh.
I mean, one of the this Freud uses the term subconscious,
Uh-huh.
um, and whereas Jung uses the term unconscious. And if you go back to the similar people who were, the early studies of hypnosis, the New Thought movement, then what they said is there's a superconscious and then there's a
Yeah.
subconscious, and
Yes.
the superconscious is effectively what we've been talking about as the spirit,
Right.
which has a level of insight and knowledge, and sometimes immediate, because one of the things that these people were studying at the time is the savant syndrome. How
Yes.
was it that you get these incredible calculators or people who know what day of the week it was 2,000 years ago, and they were able to do this straight away, like they were tapping into the divine mind.
Yeah.
Um, and so I agree that in terms of categorization, I agree that we need to bring a superconscious in as well as a so-called subconscious. But the unconscious, in Jung's terms, and also in terms of our function, I mean, a lot of our activity goes on at this unconscious level,
Yeah.
sort of automated level. But what I think is important is the symbolic aspect of this. Um, that there is an intelligence within us, which is of a different sort, and so we, as so-called conscious beings, to different degrees, we need to pay attention to what these messages that are coming from this other dimension of ourselves, and that's particularly done, as you know, through dreams
Yeah.
and the way and symbols and the understanding of fairy tales, and archetypes and individuation and the hero's journey, the heroine's journey.
Yeah.
Um, so so I think we need to the extent that we can, we need to expand our sense of self beyond this very narrow spectrum of what we take to be conscious, and bring in these deeper dimensions.
Enzymes are one of the most important things we can use to supplement our diet. Very few people have normal levels of digestive enzymes. It's extremely common to be digestive enzyme deficient because so many people are eating cooked foods, processed foods, packaged foods, etc. The best digestive enzymes I've ever found are Masszymes by Bioptimizers. And one of the things I like about them is not only are they the most advanced technology for how they're produced, the science behind them, but I take them on an empty stomach every morning and every night as proteolytic enzymes to help clean my body. So I've got Wade here, who's the formulator of these enzymes, to tell us how do they work as digestive and proteolytic enzymes, because today I think we really need to be supplementing with high quality enzymes. So Wade, what's unique about Masszymes?
Well, one of the interesting things is undigested protein is one of the biggest contaminants that cause problem for people, whether it's in their blood or inflammatory conditions or even impairing recovery. And it's quite common amongst athletes who have high protein diets, interesting enough, who are looking to add recovery, but they're not breaking down their protein effectively. And that was my case way back in the day as a former bodybuilding champion. So we set about cultivating and developing an enzyme formulation that handled all of the amino acids in a pH range from 2 to 12, as well as providing an assortment of assistant enzymes. In other words, it doesn't just break down protein, it handles carbohydrates, it handles fats, it handles fibers, a variety of different things, and they work synergistically together to make sure that you can break down just about any food and digest it properly. Now, when you talk about the difference between enzymes, there's digestive enzymes and systemic enzymes. Systemic enzymes such as like nattokinase or serrapeptase. Well, they don't help break down digestion, but they can break down inflammation or inflammatory conditions, undigested proteins, or scarring tissue inside the body. Well, it turns out when you take Masszymes on an empty stomach, it works exactly the same way. It will go into the bloodstream and now works as a systemic enzyme, reducing inflammation, accelerating recovery times. Matt just tore his Achilles tendon and made a full recovery after surgery within a few weeks, which they expected for many months. He was taking as many as 100 a day. Now, I'm not suggesting people do that, but this was an extreme condition. And the bottom line is Masszymes is great for recovery, for cleaning up undigested proteins in the system, as well for digesting just about any meal. If this isn't the best digestive enzyme or systemic enzyme that you've ever taken, you get your money back. That's the Bioptimizer guarantee.
Right now, you can get a bottle of Masszymes for free. All you need to do is pay a small shipping fee, and there's no catch. There's no tricks, no forced continuity, nothing to cancel. They are so confident in their products that they offer a 365-day money-back guarantee, so I'm positive you'll be satisfied with the results. So I strongly suggest you head over to the Bioptimizer's website and grab your bottle before they either run out or take this offer away.
You can try Bioptimizer's Masszymes at bioptimizers.com/living4d and get 10% off using the code PAUL10. That's bioptimizers.com/living, the number 4 and the letter D, and the code is PAUL10. Plus, Bioptimizers always have great bonuses and offers when you purchase multiple bottles. So make sure you check them out at bioptimizers.com/living4d and use the promo code PAUL10 for your 10% discount.
I read a great book called Your Body is Your Subconscious Mind by Candace Pert. I don't know if you've ever seen that. A very good book.
I did know Candace a little bit. She gave a lecture for us in London 25 years ago.
Yeah, fantastic book. And it was after that book that I started differentiating subconscious from unconscious.
Okay.
So I distinguish the subconscious as the wisdom of the body and the cells and systems of the body, but the unconscious as the consciousness that flows through us, that literally extends itself out all the way through the entirety of the universe. So, you could go personal unconscious, collective unconscious, solar unconscious, galactic unconscious, etc. But based on my research, and when I do this kind of research, I not only study the literature, but I talk to my soul and say, what's the answer to these questions? And my soul says the unconscious is largely based on God's habitual dreaming nature. So if you think of Waddington's creodes, for example, that Rupert Sheldrake talks about, but my soul said, think of when you look at the stars, you see galaxies and stars everywhere because that's a habit of how God creates its physical expression of itself. So the unconscious is the utilization of the habits that have worked consistently. And so when we're using our unconscious to gain knowledge, we're actually tapping into the experiential nature of all of the existence of God, where the superconscious is something that creates novelty that's beyond the unconscious. It's a novelty generator.
No, I like that. So it's sort of creativity. It's where creativity comes in.
Yeah.
And again, the New Thought thinkers like Thomas Troward, they talked a lot about the creative process in the individual is one of his essays.
Yes. The superconscious in a number of the resources I've studied is related to as a superpositional state where anything's possible. So if for example, when you write a poem, you're writing something completely novel. So potentially you're tapping into the superconscious because you're creating something that's never been created before. But the unconscious may carry the structure of the poem, like whether you're writing like Hafiz or Tagore, or, how your rhythm and flow might be, that might be an unconscious structure, but what you're actually saying would be completely novel. So that might be coming from the superconscious aspects of yourself.
Yeah, that sounds plausible to me.
Yeah, it's just based on my own conception after all this research. We've talked about the self a fair bit. As you know, from Buddhism to Christianity to many religions, Sufism, there's a lot of competing and conflicting ideas about what the self is with the little self and the capital SELF. and some don't even believe that there is a self. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on the difference between little self and capital SELF.
Well, we've been talking quite a lot about that already, I think.
Yeah.
That I think, broadly speaking, the small s is the sense of separation, which is the ego,
Uh-huh.
whereas the large S is the universal self, which in fact informs the small self if the small self could realize that. And so the idea that the small self is separate and autonomous and not linked to the larger whole and derived from the larger whole is an illusion.
Yeah.
But it's a very persistent illusion, and I
Yeah.
think that the spiritual process is, I put it as my experience is one of gradual universalization. That I like to think that I'm acquiring a more universal outlook, as I mature,
Yeah.
and so you become less fixated on the small self and the needs and desires of the small self.
I like Edward Edinger's definition of the self with a capital S. He says the capital SELF represents everything that supports your ability to live and to be, from family to food to water to air to the whole of the elements of the earth, without which you can't exist. And the little self, more along the lines of what you've said, our kind of individual sense of self. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is it, I've personally read over 120 books on the soul, and I can probably only recall 2 of them that said anything about how to make contact with your soul and have a relationship with it. What I've always found that paradoxical. In fact, after about 120 books, it pissed me off. I'm like, why? I want to know how to talk to my soul. So this is like 20 plus years ago now. So I went in my sauna and I went into meditation and I said, dear soul, if you are there, do something that's undeniable that I cannot mistake as you. And all of a sudden, a huge surge of energy went up my body, like right up my spine and out the top of my head like a volcano. And it shocked me because I don't even know how to do that to myself. And I said, again, my dear soul, was that you that just moved all that energy? Yes, big surge of energy. So I said, well, how do I talk to you? Can you show me what your no feels like? And it was a downward flowing of energy and a sinking like someone's lying to you.
Oh, interesting.
And so I began working with that. And through time and practice, I got to the point now where I can ask a question to my soul and it talks to me just like I hear my own thoughts. And so my soul guides me on everything that I do, especially when I don't want my ego to get involved. But I've been teaching my students how to connect with their soul and get guided by their soul for many, many years now, and it's radically changed their lives. But anyhow, I just was curious of your thoughts. Why do we have all these books on the soul, but no one's teaching us how to have a relationship with it?
Well, that's because it's theoretical.
Yeah.
and we're talking about lived experience here. And
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, it's one aspect of you speaking to another aspect.
Yeah.
And what's important in this relationship with whatever you call this is the listening.
Yes,
Is to
absolutely.
create the space, is to empty your mind and to listen. And
Absolutely.
if you don't listen, I can't write poetry if I don't listen.
Yes.
Because I hear some lines, or images that come into
Yeah.
my mind, and so in one way it's we're talking to ourselves, whether it's a large S or a small S.
Well, that's
Uh,
the soul would be like the large S, and the person listening would be like the little s. So it's the dialogue between the whole of us and the point of consciousness that's doing the poem, right? Writing the poem.
that's right, and I think it's about depth and being.
Yes.
These are different languages because we suffer from a lack of being and a lack of depth in our society today because everything is pulling us outwards.
Yeah. Good dialogue. I'm enjoying your responses to these things. In Leslie Stein's excellent book, The Self and Union Psychology, Theory and Clinical Practice, page 351, Jung is quoted as follows: "You see, before she can realize the nature of the Tao, she must fully destroy all the ideas behind which she has been sheltered hitherto, because only one who is able to deliver himself over entirely to the river of life can experience the Tao." Rumi says to get to God, you must become a heretic. If Jung and Rumi are correct here, it also means that memorizing Bible passages or any such scripture, even if one believes them to be facts or the word of God, is ultimately to accumulate more ideas that shelter people from the full experience of the river of life or the Tao. It seems high time that humanity got beyond an intellectual relationship with God or Tao and orients itself to heart-centered awareness of love and relationship to self, other, and God or Tao. I think that at an unconscious level, that we know at an unconscious level, and that we may be now experiencing the third psychedelic revival to gain an experience of the sacred, the numinous that is deeply personal and undeniable. I just would love to hear your thoughts in that regard.
Well, there's a lot of sequence of thought in
Yeah,
there.
well, you can,
I mean,
you can.
the short answer is that I read the Tao every day.
Yeah, I love it.
And the one I have is Rosemary Anderson's translation, the Divine Feminine Tao Te Ching.
Oh, interesting. I haven't heard of that one.
Well, the Tao is feminine, I think.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's dark virtue, dark
Yeah.
wisdom. It's implicate. It's
Yes. Very.
enfolded. It's process. It's humility. It's not putting your reputation, looking after the body as well.
Yeah.
And it's the middle way. It's fathomless. It's
Yes.
fathomless.
It
And
is.
so in reading it, I read just a poem or a chapter a day, and it just allows me to sink into another level of being. And I think that harmony and the flow and water, these are very important images that we need to ask ourselves how we can be in harmony with this larger sense of life,
Yes.
and then flow with it. I think and in fact I haven't got them here because they're in France, but I have two statues collected by my grandfather of Lao Tzu,
Oh, beautiful.
and one is in soapstone. It's a small one,
Wow.
and the other is painted, and it's larger, and it's got gilt painting. It definitely needs restoring, but there you are. And so I'm feeling affinity that he selected these works of art to add to his collection.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, we've come a long way. I think looking at the last couple of questions, we've already we've already talked about these things. So, is there any closing comments you'd like to share, David, based on what we've explored, and any inspirational comments for people who are feeling a little scared and stressed about what's going on in the world? And if also any resources you'd like to share, such as websites or anything like that.
Well, I think what I'll do is I'll just say a couple of things, and then I'll read another poem.
Excellent.
And so the essence of how Peter Dunoff understands the important things in life, the 5 principles, and they're love, wisdom, truth, justice, and goodness, righteousness and justice, goodness or virtue. And he says that it's in these principles, in understanding and enacting these principles, that the world will be set to rights. That if a world is not based on love, is not based on wisdom, is not based on truth, is not based on justice, is not based on goodness, then it's not the best world that we can enact.
Right.
So that seems to me enormously important and
Yeah.
applicable. And so it goes back to an earlier part of our conversation when we were saying that this exoteric idea of belief systems is and fundamentalism. People
Yeah.
think they're right, and their version is right, and you can
Yeah.
kill anybody else who doesn't agree.
Right.
Whereas the principles are not beliefs; they're principles that you have to understand the depth of the principle and then apply it. And so that would be, and I felt, in the sea of lies and deception that we've been experiencing over the last few years, these principles are more important than ever.
Yes. Yeah.
And
They're
then
like the keel on the sailboat.
yes, and then I think a good poem to, maybe I'll just yes, I'll read you this one.
Okay.
This is called Anchoring Presence. And I've got Plotinus saying, remembering is for those who have forgotten.
I love Plotinus. I've studied him extensively.
One of his great. And so here's the poem. Within us all is vastness that stands like a massive mountain in the center of our lives. A timeless tower of strength anchored in the formless ground. We are here to bridge the worlds of formlessness with form, planting germinating seeds of light of infinite value and beauty, folding our wings into narrowing space, seeking to remember ourselves as pristine wholeness, as primordial oneness, differentiated here on earth. Can we surrender our attachments? Can we co-create the sublime, accessing the healing power of self, capital S? The human within the divine within the human. Know that you are deeply loved, even behind the walls of your fear and vulnerability. Life will both crush and polish, so that we can shine in our full radiance as beings of light, waking from our living dream as one being, capital O-B, one being, fully alive and present together.
Awesome. Beautiful. Very anchoring, very stabilizing, very centering words.
That's what we're going to need in 2025. Anchoring presence. Anchoring presence. So people can my own website is lamentably out of date, and so there's no point in going there. But my main activities are done through the Scientific and Medical Network, scientificandmedical.net, and the Galileo Commission, galileocommission.org.
Okay.
And so those are the sort of outlets. And I sent you my Facebook and LinkedIn profiles.
Right.
So
yeah, Penny will put that in the show notes.
Yeah.
And what I did, and I'd encourage everybody to do it, I buy season passes to all your webinars, and because they're all recorded, I can just cut and paste the URL onto my phone, and I watch them while I'm eating lunch, or play them while I'm working out in the gym, so I can really get more information without having to set time aside, because I'm able to kind of juggle it. And I don't know, there's like almost, what is it, one a week or something, isn't there?
One a week. Yes. And then we've got the Mystics and Scientists coming up, which is going to be on flourishing in an era of complexity and chaos.
Yes, that's a good topic.
And then we have our Beyond the Brain conference, beyondthebrain.org. That's not until November. And so we have a very active program, and I'd encourage your listeners to tune into us and to take advantage of what we're able to offer.
Yeah, I encourage them too. I've gained a tremendous amount from the years that I've been interacting with the Scientific Medical Network and the Galileo Commission. And I think some of the best money I spend is my membership to that, to the webinars, because it's such a constant stream of high quality information, and with great people and a very diverse. It's not like all stuck on one ideology. One minute you're talking about quantum physics, another minute you're talking about the Tao, and then you're talking about psychological research. So a lot of variety. It really helps round people's mindset out. I think that's really important.
No, absolutely. So, and it's always exciting for me to put these things together.
I bet. Well, you do a great job.
Well, thank you very much, Paul.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you to all of you guys for listening and joining us and helping make the world a better place for all living beings now and in the future. Thank you to my sponsors for your lovely products. Thank you to any of you that buy from the sponsors. The products are all top-notch, organic, and the money you spend with the sponsors supports regenerative farmers, organic farmers, biodynamic farmers, and you're supporting yourself, you're supporting the planet, and you're supporting ethical companies that are really doing a good job to take care of us, and you're supporting the podcast. So lots of love to all of you. I will come back next week with another awesome podcast. And once again, thank you, David.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a really interesting conversation.
My pleasure. I'll hope to have you again.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guest, David Lorimer. We encourage you to check out the Scientific and Medical Network at scientificandmedical.net, where you can explore their webinars, conferences, David's podcast, Imaginal Inspirations, as well as articles, videos, and much more. You can find David's books on Amazon, including Survival, Death as Transition, Thinking Beyond the Brain, and A New Renaissance, Transforming Science, Spirit, and Society. Check the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast for details on the special offers from our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, and Organifi, as well as links to Paul's social media, his YouTube channels, and his blog. We invite you to become a member of Paul's Spirit Gym podcast. With your membership, you get access to exclusive members-only opportunities from Paul's guests, live Q&A sessions with Paul and his guests, access to the podcast members forum within the Spirit Gym community where you can interact with other passionate listeners, and the chance to purchase exclusive Spirit Gym merchandise. You can subscribe today by going to paulchek.com/podcast. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.